Well, maybe should I just start things off here?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I think everybody in this room knows my name and what is about to happen here. But my name's Peter Miller, playing a band called We Are The Willows. Maybe this will be helpful for folks who watch this later.
Yes.
And I'm here today at the Martin County Historical Society to talk about an album that I wrote called Picture Portrait. And all the songs on this album are based on a whole bunch of letters my grandparents wrote to each other between 1942 and 1946. And at this time, my grandpa was stationed in the Southwest Pacific during World War II. And all the songs are sort of my attempt to kind of catalog and make sense of his experience overseas, and both as a soldier, but also his relationship with my grandmother, and trying to kind of fill in some of the blanks between their letter writing. And I'm really interested to hear more about what Lenny's project is about.
Okay. For those of you that aren't familiar with this, I recently put a book together called Martin County Veterans, Their Sacrifices, Our Freedom. I got started on that in 2020. I was asked to do stories on the Martin County Veterans Memorial Site. The people that they were getting a helicopter that they had brought in from California, I guess. And I was asked to do stories on those people that had experience with helicopters in the military. So there were probably, trying to think, maybe 15, 20 stories of helicopter pilots or gunners or people that were on helicopters. Well, then my next thought was, why not expand that to include Martin County veterans? So I put out a word in the paper to anyone who would be interested in participating. I think we had it on Facebook, our website, and so on. And I tried to make it as easy as possible for those that wanted to be involved. I had kind of a boilerplate type of format for them, so they really just had to fill things out, turn it in to me. I put it together in story form. I sent it back to them for editing, corrections, changes, or whatever they wanted to do. They sent it back to me when they had final approval, and they included pictures if they had, and everybody had at least 1 or 2 pictures. So
Yeah.
So I had a total of 82 that responded for the book. So
Wow.
that's where we're at.
So you're kind of you acted sort of as a curator, and I mean, it sounds like you were filling in some of the story too,
Sure.
with their experiences, but you were really just curating all of these different experiences and.
Yeah, I found it to be interesting, informative, educational, and inspiring. I mean, I spent 3.5, 4 years in the military myself, but some of these people were, they were pilots. Some of the experiences they had, just unbelievable. One individual was shot down 3 times in Vietnam.
Wow.
Just all different sorts of experiences. One of our local electricians was a gunner on a helicopter, and he was wounded, so he's got a Purple Heart. I had no idea. I mean, I've known him for years,
Yeah.
so just things like that.
I have a question for you. And
Yeah.
maybe even that last story kind of brings this up. With my grandfather, he didn't talk much about his experiences. And in these letters, like I shared with you just a moment ago, he really didn't talk much about his experience overseas. He wasn't able to write about what they were doing, where they were. All of that stuff would, it was censored, and if these letters were, stolen by the enemy, they'd have information. So it makes sense why it was censored. But do you think it's pretty common for veterans to not talk about their experiences in war, such that you know this person but didn't know that he had a Purple Heart? And if you think that's common, I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
I think it just depends on the individual, and it depends on their experience. I think certainly some of those experiences are suppressed.
Yeah.
Because they just don't want to deal with them.
Yeah.
For one reason or another, and I guess I can, to a degree, understand. I didn't experience that myself.
Right.
And others are so willing the individual that was shot down 3 times, he was just so willing to give me all the details and
Yeah.
tell about each experience.
Hmm.
So I think it depends on the individual and the specific incident or incidents as far as what they were involved with.
Right, I suppose, yeah.
So, yeah, I saw a different variety of different experiences that
Yeah.
some were willing to talk about and some just didn't want to get into. One individual didn't want to, what I've also done is interviewed a number of these people for our local cable access TV and our story and so on. And I've had a couple of them that they just didn't want to do that, didn't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
so.
I imagine it'd be hard to share those kinds of experiences with people. I mean, with my grandfather's letters, my uncle, he was a Vietnam vet, and he's done a lot more like research into kind of, okay, my grandpa was at this battle on this date, this is what we know about this battle, and I know now that he went through some really traumatic events that
Sure.
I can't imagine living through that. And so I can imagine it'd be really difficult to get onto a television show and share those
talk
kinds
about
of experiences.
Yeah, it just might bring back memories that you don't want to really bring back.
Yeah.
So,
Peter, were you able to speak to your grandpa? I mean, even before this album, about his experiences? Was he open about that stuff?
He wasn't very open about it. When I was in high school, my dad sat him down. I had this camcorder that I used to like film skateboard tricks and stuff. And my dad sat him down, had this little globe and basically had him sort of walk through the timeline of his term of service. And that was something I couldn't that tape is something I couldn't get my hands on as I was working on this album. And so I would ask my grandpa questions and try to talk to him about it, but I think it was a combination of him just probably not wanting to relive some of these memories, but also at this time he was diagnosed with dementia, and that disease was progressing, and so those two components combined, we didn't end up really talking very much about this stuff, and that lack of understanding for me of what his experience was a big impetus in writing this album to begin with. I'm a sensitive artist type, and I have big feelings about things, and I read these letters and couldn't help but wonder but what was he feeling? What did that feel like? It must have been so difficult. And I kind of, in some ways, filled in the gaps with my own imagination and with stories from my grandmother, and just tried to sort of imagine what I would feel in that situation. And so,
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah.
Who has them letters now? Do you have them?
my Uncle Morris has the letters.
Okay.
My grandmother gave them to me when I graduated from college, kind of as a graduation present. And so I spent several years reading through those and just taking a bunch of notes about what I thought was interesting and the questions I had. And it probably took me longer than it should have to realize that I needed to write, these were songs. I needed to write songs out of this. But so my Uncle Morris has them, and I'm trying to think of a delicate or appropriate way to ask if I can have those back at some point. But I feel like, he deserves to have them now, and hopefully after he's done with them, I can have them.
Sure. Maybe a question for Lenny. In putting together this project, talking to so many different veterans, and doing your interviews before and after, what were some surprises that you had while interviewing people, whether it's their stories or the way that they acted or the way they told their stories?
well, I think what was surprising to me was all of the things I learned, I guess, from all of those individuals that were willing to participate. And I guess something else, the willingness of the ones that came forward. They were just so willing to provide whatever was needed that they had, that they could, you know, pictures, their story, helping to get the final copy done and everything, so.
Sure.
And the fact that, once you went through these and kind of put them together and sent them back and got the final copy back, their appreciation.
Mm.
That's probably the most surprising thing, I guess, the fact that they were so appreciative of this being done.
Sure.
You know, I didn't necessarily expect that, I guess.
Yep.
You know, but yeah, they were very appreciative.
Mm-hmm.
Got a number of emails and phone calls and just comments that they were so glad it was done.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I have to imagine that it would feel pretty good for them to have their story be told,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
I mean, one thing I think about with like larger historical events is, you know, we get kind of the like textbook version of all these things, but like there are so many individuals involved in these conflicts with really specific individual experiences and
First-hand experience.
first-hand
Yeah.
experience, and I have to imagine it feels pretty good for them to have somebody speak on their behalf or, you know, share their story. So
Sure.
yeah.
And along with that, Peter, while reading these letters, what were some of the themes that really jumped out at you that you wanted to musically capture?
Yeah. I mean, one of which is just kind of right. It's very obvious that, you know, in some ways, like love and connection to the outside world. You know, so much of this correspondence between my grandparents really was their courtship. They're trying to get to know each other. My grandfather met my grandmother about, I think, 6 to 9 months before he left for boot camp. He even asked her to marry him before he left, but she said no. And which I think is, you know, smart choice. It makes sense. Like, so they were really just trying to get to know each other through these letters, and it really became clear that that connection was what sustained my grandpa during his term of service, was this hope for a future, hope, specifically a hope for a future with my grandmother. And it became clear to me that that is just the thing that he leaned on as he was, you know, serving out his term of service. And then I think kind of in some other ways too, I think like, I just am really interested in like, this sounds overly philosophical, but like the nature of the self. What are we comprised of? Is it the external world and these experiences that we have that shape our ethics, our, you know, sense of obligation to our community, or is that some of that inherent in who we are? And I think it's a question I keep asking myself all the time, but one particular story in these letters I think illustrates something about that question. So there's a series of letters where my grandma is living in St. Cloud, Minnesota, working as a riveter, and my grandpa, I don't know where he was geographically, but I know, you know, he had just spent 2 weeks in a foxhole, and so they're corresponding finally, and my grandmother says, oh, there are these soldiers stationed here in St. Cloud, and, you know, boy, Uncle Sam is sure lucky to have these guys. They're great men, they're excellent, and while I'm sure that's true, my grandpa couldn't help but understand it as like, what the heck, I just got out of a foxhole. I've been in there for 2 weeks. Like, these guys are great. And he says something to the effect of, I think a person's circumstances have more to do with who they are than their character does. Or I'm really butchering that quote, but essentially he makes this philosophical statement about who you are as a person is more a matter of your environment and where you are than what is inherently in you. And, you know, I just thought that was pretty profound. And as, you know, your opinion about that component of human nature has so many different implications in morality, in justice systems, and all of that stuff. And so, I know I'm rambling here, and I'm sorry, but I would say another core theme of the record is just trying to understand human nature, the human condition, and what kind of place is more like full of philosophical questions than the theater of war. So that's another kind of aim of the album, is to suss some of that stuff out. And as a non-soldier, as a person who's an artist, you know, I don't have that experience of being in active combat and what perspective that would give you on the nature of reality. And so trying to figure that stuff out too.
Sure.
Hope that made sense. Sorry.
Now, Peter, you've obviously written other music. Lenny, you've written other books, other articles. Sort of a question for both of you, but I'll pose it to Lenny first. How is your approach different with working with veterans and their stories than it was with your other books or your other articles, and how you approached it or how you looked at it?
Well, the other articles or books was primarily research based, whereas this was based on the experiences of the individual. And as I mentioned, I tried to put together a format to make it as easy as possible for them to relate their experience. I wanted obviously their name, branch of service, when they served, where they served, and their experiences. And I think that made it easy for them to at least get started with what they were going to present. And that gave me the opportunity to take that information, put it together in story form, get it back to them for approval or editing or changes or whatever, and asking them also for pictures, both of themselves, and I had some that gave me up to 20, 25 pictures.
Wow.
That included where they were in Vietnam or wherever it happened to be. And one of the things, kind of going back to what you said earlier, that was surprising or interesting about what I did, is somebody that may not know, I was a teacher before I started in this, my second life. And four of my former students are in this book, and this one right here on the cover is a pilot, and that's one of the kids I had in school. They were fifth graders, so
Sure.
you know, they survived in spite of being with me for a
Sure,
year.
yeah.
So they can really be congratulated for what they've accomplished.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think you being a veteran as well, do you think that helped the people that were submitting stories to know that maybe feel more comfortable submitting stories, knowing you could share some of those experiences?
I would think so. I would feel that way, I guess. You know, because there is something about having been there, whether or not it was in combat or just in active duty.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think so. I definitely think so.
We'll kind of bop that question over to you then, Peter. So how did the picture portrait album differ from other music you've written, whether it's process or how you felt it turned out, or you know, how is that different from your other musical projects?
You know, I think a lot of the other music I've made has been very, you know, starts internally from my experience, my own feelings, and then it's kind of an attempt to express those. Whereas this was working with an external source, and in a lot of ways, all of the things I would probably toil over trying to figure out with other music. You know, what's the theme of this song? What's the content? What am I trying to say? A lot of that's already there in the text, and so in a lot of ways, I was just trying to honor my grandfather's experience and try my best to kind of, fill in the blanks and color it, So, yeah, just kind of a difference between coming from inside me to having an external source is probably the main difference.
Sure. And maybe this is a little of a nuts and bolts question,
Sure.
but can you talk about a little of your process in terms of how these went from letters to songs? You talked about a little bit, but what was that process like for kind of refining these?
Sure. Well, I worked on a lot of these between 2009 and 2011. I was touring full-time, solo, all over the country for 2 or 3 months at a time. And living in my van and sleeping in Walmart parking lots, very glamorous. Oftentimes I would have a lot of time before shows. And so I would read through the letters, and like I mentioned, I would just take notes. I would start developing little keys for okay, this is this kind of letter. This is under this theme. Here's sort of a random thought about this, and simultaneously, I would just spend time, kind of just playing guitar, finding chords that felt interesting, starting to just hum some basic melodies, and kind of over time just doing all those two things simultaneously. I'd find, there'd be a phrase that my was in a letter, and I'd be like, oh, that kind of has a ring to it. 373-22636, my new name, Okay, and then that became the impetus of a song.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of in some ways, it became a puzzle almost more than anything else.
Sure.
So,
Question for both of you guys. Did you feel a certain pressure in putting these projects together, knowing that you were kind of working for somebody else, your grandpa or these veterans? Was there a certain pressure that wasn't maybe present in other things you've worked on?
I guess the only pressure I felt is I wanted to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I felt pressure in that regard. I just wanted to make certain that what was put down on paper was accurate in terms of what the individual wanted.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think I accomplished that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure, so they had the ample opportunity to review everything and make sure it was done right.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
yeah. It sounds like you built in a process that would ensure your success for that, right? They're filling out that survey, they're a part of the editing process.
Yeah, I
That's
wanted to
smart.
really ensure accuracy
Yeah,
with
yeah.
what was being put down on paper. The last thing I'd ever want is, hey, I didn't say that, or that's not right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And did you have a lot of feedback from that process then?
Yeah. Some more than others,
Mm-hmm.
and some, it's just fine the way you got it. And then I had one individual that came in about 3 times and sat down, we went through everything about 3-4 times, but that's fine.
Sure.
Then we had it right.
Mm-hmm.
So from his perspective, because it was his story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Peter? With writing, you feel a certain pressure to make your grandpa proud?
I did, yeah. And his dementia had progressed. By the time I was done with these songs, or close to done, his dementia had progressed to a point where he wouldn't understand what was happening there. But I think the best review we got of this album was it was all completed. We had the CDs and vinyl manufactured, and I brought the CD over to my grandmother's apartment and just put these big headphones on her, and she sat there with the lyrics and listened to all 20 songs, and at the end of it she said, you know what, you really captured what it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't,
Best compliment.
I could have gotten.
Yeah.
So that was a huge relief, and
How old were your grandparents at that point?
I'm trying to think here. My grandpa would have been, I think, 91, and my grandmother
Oh,
would have
wow.
been 89. You're talking at the point that the album was done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah. And so, yeah. But yeah.
So there's, we talked about these are people that, are from communities. These are people we see on the street. There's going to be more people out there that run into grandparents' letters, more people that are going to have these people in their community. Maybe both of you can touch on why it's important to tell these stories or gather these stories, and why is it important, and what did it eventually mean for you guys?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, if something like this isn't done, they're lost, they're gone. They'll, they'll be totally forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wish there would have been more that would have been involved, but, 82 Martin County veterans, that's, a good start.
Sure.
And we can maybe go to a second edition, maybe there'll be more,
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess, just like anything with history, if it's not documented, you don't get it down, either for display or on paper in some way, pretty soon it's forgotten,
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, and it's such essential stuff.
and there are just so many things that we can't get done because there's a limited amount of people that are doing this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think of businesses that were present at one time, but they're no longer here, and those of us that have lived here a long time remember them.
Yeah.
But other people think, yeah, I never heard of that one before. Well, let's get those things documented and get them down on paper,
Yeah.
get pictures, and we've at least got something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think maybe my answer kind of, in some ways, piggybacks on that, and I think there's definitely some inherent value to preserving these experiences, the history of it. But my experience of reading these letters was that it changed me. I gained understanding about who my grandfather was, who my grandmother was, and that gave me insight into who I am and the type of person that I want to be. And I think that, that is essential for generations coming to really understand where you came from, recognize the mistakes there, and recognize the successes there. And so, yeah.
Good. So maybe a question to sort of wrap things up. What are your guys' future projects? Peter, what do you got coming down the pipeline, either recently or coming up in the future here?
Sure. I'm wrapping up a bunch of different music projects. Have like a instrumental recording of just piano, cello, and clarinet. It's kind of a meditative batch of songs, and then have another batch of songs called Everything Changed, which is essentially about that little kiddo you hear screaming over there.
Yep.
Just that, he finding out he was coming into this world just changed everything.
Sure.
And then the band is working on a whole bunch of songs. We're still really figuring out kind of what those are going to be about, but it's they're coming together and it's feeling really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you have more of a propensity to do another concept album at some point?
I kind of think that no matter what I'm doing, it always sort of turns into a concept album. I'm really interested in an overarching theme that kind of groups together a body of work. It may not be as explicit as, here's a 20-song album about my grandparents' letters. That's very explicit concept album, but
Yep.
it'll be a pretty cohesive unit, a body of work.
Sure. All right, and Lenny, what's on tap for you?
Well, as you well know, Jim, I think the next thing we're going to look at and kind of use the format from this is the businesses in Martin County, as many that will participate, both current businesses and those that are no longer in existence, but if somebody is in the county that worked there or owned it or whatever. I'd like to provide them with a format that they can put together some history on their business,
Yeah.
provide some pictures, and hopefully we can put another book together with documenting current and former businesses of Martin County. So that'd be the goal. Might be kind of a big project. I'm hoping to get good responses, you know, but I'm sure we won't get 100%, but we'll take what we can get and try to put it together.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, Blake did tell me, now this is up to you, he did tell me you brought your guitar.
I did, yeah.
So, I don't know if...
I'd be happy to
would
play
you
something.
please maybe favor us with a song here to
Sure.
close out?
Okay, sure. Maybe while I'm grabbing my guitar, Lenny, I think the idea of that book is really interesting, and you know, I thought a lot about small businesses in communities like this and how they've related to big box stores coming into town. And do you have maybe a prediction of kind of historically? Do you think you'll find a trend with businesses opening or closing in relation to these larger stores coming into the community?
Oh, I think we've seen a trend from the 60s and 70s on to today, yeah, definitely. When I think of what the downtown was like when we moved here back in 1967 and how things have changed, you know, it's been significant.
Yeah.
And it's not just big box stores here, it's just retail, the face of retail has changed quite a bit,
Yeah.
for one, you know.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, yeah, when you can get Amazon to
Yeah.
have a drone fly to your door and drop something off,
Yeah.
it's hard to compete with that.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I don't sing, so.
oh, I thought you were gonna sing harmony here. All right, well, I'm gonna sing a song for you called "Dear Miss Bransoner," and I apologize to all the folks from the Fairmount Opera House who've heard me preface this song a half dozen times at this point.
It doesn't get old.
Okay, I keep saying the same stuff, so I'm sorry. But when my grandpa first met my grandma, he wanted every chance he could get to just go see her and talk to her, and so he took a job with my grandma's dad chopping wood on their farm. But his employment did not last long because he spent more time trying to talk to my grandmother than chopping wood. So, yeah. So yeah, here's a song called "Dear Miss Bransoner." Dear Miss Bransoner, you are on my mind all of the time. I'm sleeping on the ground. For now, I'll forget about babies born. My aunt has met the Lord. While she is living proof that our intentions do what we want them to. A 21 gun salute could bring me back to you in a casket wrapped in a flag. Well, I would be quarantined to a row of teeth in an army green cemetery yard. Dear Miss Bransoner, you are on my heart, and you were from the start. To be there chopping wood was as good a chance as any to see your face in time and place your eyes and your kind smile. Well, I will reconcile me to you. A 21 gun salute could bring me back to you in a casket wrapped in a flag. Well, I would be quarantined to a row of teeth in an army green cemetery yard. Well, I will be back. I'll carry that casket, I'll carry that flag. Well, I would be quarantined to a row of teeth in an army green, an army green, an army green, an army green, an army green cemetery yard. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you for the song. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Lenny, for sitting down and sharing with us your projects. So.
Thanks for having us. It was a delight. Appreciate you. Thanks, Alan.